Okay, we're on chapter 4 of Voyagers. And this chapter is called The Journey Toward Awakening, Sinking Atlantis, and Earth Quarantine. The sinking of Atlantis, the ending of open extraterrestrial relations, and the withdrawal of extraterrestrial technologies, premature opening of the Ark of the Covenant, and descent of the sphere of Amente, Earth's quarantine, DNA mutation and the creation of the ego and the higher self, 9,558 BC through 8,000 BC. Following the 28,000 BC explosion in Atlantis, which reduced the continent of Atlantis to a small landmass of 3 islands in the area of what is now called the Bermuda Islands, the Guardian races continued open visitations with the cultures of Earth using the Alcyone interdimensional spiral and the Great Pyramid teleport station for easy access to Earth. The ET visitors and occasionally inter-time travelers from future Terra and past and future Earth shared open commerce with human cultures, showing their influence in various locations around the globe. As the primary teleport station was located in Egypt, Egyptian culture was strongly affected and influenced by extraterrestrial visitation. Many of their later depiction of gods originated from these early days of direct relationship with the wide variety of extraterrestrial beings. Well, that's what I've been saying for like years and years, that all the so-called gods of all the religions, they're just aliens. People just worshiping freaking aliens. The Syrian Council of Harmonic Universe 2 and the Galactic Federation and Syrian Arcturian Coalition for Interplanetary Defense of Harmonic Universe 1, along with several other Guardian allies, held the Alcyone Spiral and Egyptian Teleport Station under high security. The Anunnaki Resistance, the Dracon, their allies, or any other groups not authorized by the Syrian Council were not permitted to access the Alcyone Spiral for Earth visitation. Unauthorized groups could, however, take the long way in using other intergalactic portals which connected to Earth's portal system. Though these alternative routes of visitation demanded much more time and resources, they were still frequently used by other stellar cultures who also influenced the development of the races. The Anunnaki resistance still occasionally infiltrated the Syrian Council security systems and secretly worked with members of the Templar Anu, primarily those in the Atlantean Islands. The Atlantean culture digressed into a torturous, elitist society run by the Templar Anu operatives of the Anunnaki resistance, and due to their actions 11,558 years ago, Earth civilizations would be changed forever. The first major stumbling block to the Guardian race's awakening plan took place in 9,558 BC. The Templar Anu, motivated by the Anunnaki resistance, devised a plan to take control of the Great Pyramid teleport station so the resistance could have free access to the Alcyone Spiral. Their plan also included the destruction of the Sphere of Amente, for without the race morphogenetic field, the souls of the races would be trapped in Harmonic Universe 1, their evolutionary imprint erased. The resistance desired to use humanity as an experiment, creating a worker race that could supply them with Earth's resources, primarily gold and several other mineral compounds. Using Ankh tools pirated from the Anu Melchizedeks of the Inner Earth, the Templar Anu attempted to direct UHF fifth-dimensional energy from the Ankhs through the great crystal generators, which still remained operational in the Atlantean Islands, through the Earth's energetic grid, and into the Ark of the Covenant portal bridge. They intended to send this high-powered electromagnetic pulse through the Ark of the Covenant and into the Sphere of Amente that was held within a planetary core in the Andromeda Galaxy, Their erroneous calculations indicated that if they sent precise electromagnetic pulse patterns into the Ark of the Covenant, the sphere of Amente could be isolated as a target for destruction, but the blue flame morphogenetic field for Terra could be released and returned through the Ark of the Covenant to be used as an inexhaustible source of power. With the blue flame staff of Amente under their control, the Anunnaki resistance could easily orchestrate a massive Earth takeover. But the Templar Anu failed to access the frequency codes used by the Guardians to protectively seal the sphere of Amente against such attack, and the miscalculation became the downfall of Atlantis. When the Templar Anu sent their destroyer beam electromagnetic pulse through the Ark of the Covenant, the electromagnetic pulse intercepted the sphere of Amente with its security seal. The security seal would not allow the electromagnetic pulse to travel into the sphere of Amente, but instead created a double overtone frequency pattern that sent the electromagnetic pulse into a state of fission. The exploding energies focused on the Andromeda Galaxy quickly refracted off of the security seal on the sphere, replicated and intensified, then projected back down through the Ark of the Covenant, disseminated through the Earth grid, then refocused on their point of origin, the main crystal generator between the largest island of Atlantis. This process occurred almost instantaneously, causing a chain reaction explosion within most of the operational crystal generators. The Syrian Council discovered the plan too late and were unable to prevent the catastrophe, but they were able to rescue several groups of Syrian Council loyalists from the Atlantean islands, transporting them via interdimensional craft to Egypt. Fleets rapidly scoured the Earth in a few hours prior to the explosions, warning the cultures to retreat underground and into the inner Earth civilizations, where they would find shelter and refuge from the deluge that would soon follow. Many people from the islands, from many lands poured into the inner Earth portals, where some were not able to enter before the portals had to be closed, and so they perished. The portals and the underground passageways leading to them were sealed, closed from the inside, using the Ankh tools as Earth awaited the inevitable explosions. The first series of explosions blew apart the landmass of the largest Atlantean island, which triggered tectonic shifting beneath the ocean floor. This set off a series of explosions within the other crystal generators, disseminating the landmass of the two remaining islands, sending them deep into the caverns beneath the ocean floor. Atlantis was removed from the face of the earth into a watery grave within the caverns beneath the ocean floor. The explosion occurred in 9558 BC and resulted in yet another tilt of the Earth's axis, shifting of some global land masses, a series of earthquakes, and massive flooding in some locations. The flooding was not global. It had been during previous floods. The Giza teleport station was again thrown out of alignment as the Earth's vortex beneath it, which is Earth's heart chakra, no longer energetically lined up properly with the Alcyon spiral. Though portions of the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and several other structures did not survive these Earth changes, it would be many years before they were returned to their grandeur. The Guardian races had more pressing problems with which to contend. After the explosions beneath Atlantis ceased, the Syrian Council ordered the Syrian Blue race to remove the crystal generators, which had not exploded. The massive crystals were dredged from the ocean floor and returned to Sirius B. With the removal of the crystals, humanity's technological abilities were thrown into the Dark Ages, and the once glorious civilizations of Earth were reduced to primitive organizations based upon survival concerns and built through manual labor. Though the memory of advanced societal structure remained, its applications became impossible without the powers supplied through the advanced extraterrestrials' technology. The crystals were removed as a safety precaution, so more explosions did not ensue. But later it was decided that these technologies would not be returned to Earth until the races had evolved to a more mature comprehension of the proper use of power. But this was only the beginning of the problems humanity would face as a result of the sinking of Atlantis. So yeah, we're kind of just sitting here in a quarantine and not given access to the technology that would liberate everyone. Yeah, what a shit show. There's a segment from the X-Files that describes, this agenda to just keep humanity stuck at a certain level of technology and, not give them access to a lot of this stuff. Okay, let's continue. Following the deluge, the Syrian Council, the Syrian Council placed further security seals on the Ark of the Covenant, which no longer permitted energy to be drawn from the blue flame in order to charge objects with UHF fifth dimensional energy. 2 objects were charged prior to this sealing, so the Egyptian cultures would have a tool through which the inner earth portals could be opened. One object was a small cylindrical object, flat on one side and made of gold, which housed a small portion of the Earth's Dimension 2 morphogenetic field, a small part of the orange-gold flame of Earth's core. This object became known as the rod. The other object, also made of gold, was a staff about 3 feet long, containing several crystalline stones, which housed a minute portion of the blue flame morphogenetic field. This object was called the staff. Though these objects did not have the power of the Ankhs, they enabled humans to enter the inner earth portals and could be used to facilitate healing, to influence weather patterns, and to access the portals of parallel Earth. The objects were stored within a lead-lined chest that was energetically charged with a frequency barrier so the energies of the rod and staff could not escape while the objects were in storage. The rod and staff and the Ankhs were placed in the custody of the Anu Melchizedeks from the inner earth, and the Ankhs were banned from being used by surface cultures. For a time, the rod and staff were used by the Egyptians who rebuilt the surface cultures, but later they were banned from the surface they were banned from surface use and deactivated. Through time, the chest in which the rod and staff were stored became known as the Ark of the Covenant. And the true meaning of the Ark of the Covenant and of the morphogenetic flames of the Dimension 2 rod and the Dimension 5 staff became lost to all but a select few who remembered the true significance of these terms. The most treacherous problem created by this Atlantean misadventure was the original seal on the Ark of the Covenant, which kept the sphere of Amente in place within the Andromeda planetary core, was sparked open by the electromagnetic pulse transmission from the Great Crystal. The sphere of Amente began its descent to Earth. The sphere of Amente could only be entered into the Earth's core if the Earth grid vibrated high enough to hold the frequencies within it, and only during the dimensional blending periods inherent to the Earth's natural time cycles. The descent of the sphere from the Andromeda galaxy would take 2,000 years. Not only was the Earth grid unprepared to house its energies, but the timing of entry would be completely out of synchronization with Earth's natural cycles. Having been released into the Ark of the Covenant portal bridge in 9,558 BC, the sphere of Amente would intercept Earth sometime in 7,558 BC. It would not arrive in time for the next dimensional blend period of 9,048 BC. It would arrive before the next dimensional blend period in 6,835 BC. If the sphere of Amente attempted to enter Earth's three-dimensional body during a time period when Earth's fourth-dimensional vortices were not open, the sphere would explode upon impact with the natural frequency barrier that separates the third and the fourth dimensions. This astral explosion would cause the Earth's fourth vortex chakra to collapse, which would systematically create a buildup of energy through the remaining vortices, and the Earth grid would explode. If the sphere passed through the astral plane into the frequency bands of the third dimension in 7,558 BC, the Earth would then be reduced to space dust. In order to avert this pending Earth cataclysm, the Ra Confederacy, Palladorian, and Syrian councils, Elohim, and several other Earth Guardian groups devised a plan through which the Earth could be spared the Earth could be spared this premature demise. The plan was put into effect in 9,540 BC. The Elohim were commissioned to alter the Earth's Dimension 2 morphogenetic field in a way that would create a natural frequency fence or energetic barrier surrounding the Earth through which the sphere of Amente would be unable to pass. Certain frequency patterns were removed from the Earth's morphogenetic field, so the fourth dimensional frequencies could no longer plug into Earth's three-dimensional body. The 7th through the 12th bass tones and 7th through the 9th overtones of the third dimensional frequency bands were taken out of Earth's morphogenetic pattern. With these frequencies, the fourth dimensional frequency bands could not connect to the Earth's three-dimensional body, so the sphere of Amente would be halted within the lowest frequency bands of the fourth dimensions as the path of frequency through which it would descend into the third dimension was severed. It would remain in the astral plane until the third dimensional frequencies were re-entered into the Earth's morphogenetic field. Without those frequencies, the Earth would not be able to pull those specific tones into its planetary grid, so Earth would be halted in its tracks of time within the middle frequency bands of the third dimension. Though this protective measure was necessary at the time, it also stunted the planet's ability to evolve naturally out of the harmonic universe 1. The Guardians intended to release the frequency fence during an appropriate time cycle period once the Earth grid had rebalanced and its vibrational rate had increased enough to accept a rapid return of the sphere of Amente. There were certain advantages and several drawbacks to this frequency fence plan. The 10th through 12th overtones of the third dimension were left within the Earth's morphogenetic field, which meant that a portion of Earth's particles would manifest within the 10th through 12th frequency bands of the third dimension. A higher vibrational Earth phantom was created into which the sphere of Amente could be released during an appropriate time cycle. Once the sphere was returned to the Earth phantom energy imprint, the higher three-dimensional aspect of the race awareness would be released from the Dimension 4 seal of Pallador and would be able to enter their race cloister after death. So part of the soul essence could return to the sphere of Amente to await the release of the fifth dimensional seal of Amente. This meant that in the dimensional blend period, or the dimensional blending period of 6,835 BC, the sphere of Amente could be entered into the 10th through 12th overtone frequency bands of Dimension 3, and from that point on, soul fragments would no longer become trapped in the Dimension 4 astral plane upon death. This was a definite advantage in terms of the evolution of consciousness. However, there were also some disadvantages created by the mechanics of the frequency fence. The first disadvantage of the frequency fence was that the natural portal structures which allowed for interstellar transit into Earth would be cut off from the interdimensional grid. Interstellar visitors could enter their craft from their craft or enter their craft into the Earth phantom frequency bands, but could not easily enter onto Earth's surface in the frequency bands below the frequency fence. Smaller, more adaptable vessels were needed to orchestrate visitation, and each time a vessel entered, it did so with the risk of disrupting the frequency fence, which could release the sphere of Amente from its storage place. The Elohim were put in charge of monitoring and protecting the frequency fence, and the Guardian organizations agreed that interstellar visitations to Earth would be strictly limited to emergency intervention. The Guardians adopted a policy of non-interference with earthly affairs, but continued to hold the frequency fence in place to preserve the integrity of the planet. It was decided that humans would be allowed to orchestrate their own affairs on Earth with the Guardians, attending to issues of evolutionary ascension from behind the scenes. So this sounds like the what's it called in the movies or the Star Trek series, the Star Trek movies, the Prime Directive, where they don't interfere too much with an evolving species, because if they did, then it would throw off their evolutionary journey. Okay, so let's see where we left off here. So it was decided that humans would be allowed to orchestrate their own affairs on Earth with the Guardians attending to issues of evolutionary ascension from behind the scenes, because the sphere of Amente was now in a location more vulnerable to resistance attack. Extremely high security measures were taken to ensure that no one disrupted the sphere or breached the frequency fence without Guardian approval. In the beginning, this fortification of the fence was intended for the security purposes, but later it was used as an opportunity for the Elohim to extend favoritism to those humans carrying genetic strains more closely connected to their own morphogenetic imprint. This gave an unfair evolutionary advantage to some humans, such as the Syrian Egyptians and those of the Hyberu cloister, who had stronger genetic ties to the Elohim than many of the other races. The overall effect of the frequency fence and the security tactics used to enforce it was that the physical Earth and its peoples were put under galactic quarantine, losing all direct assistance from and relationship to the multidimensional intergalactic communities. Because of this quarantine, information that traveled through the frequency bands of the higher dimensions would no longer transmit into the Earth's grid and cellular memory. Not only would the race memory from the sphere of Amente be unavailable to humans upon the planet, but interdimensional communications from higher dimensional fields would also be curtailed, as higher frequency transmissions could not pass through the frequency fence. As generations of these races evolved beneath the frequency fence, previous memory of humanity's involvement with the genetic relationship to the extraterrestrial civilizations faded, and the advantages of the technological advancements those relationships allowed were lost. Due to implementation of the frequency fence in 9540 BC, the Earth evolved under quarantine, and humanity was cut off from its interstellar heritage. But this was not the only disadvantage that the frequency fence created for the human populations. The process of a soul essence birthing out of the morphogenetic field of the sphere of Amente involves the essence passing out of its morphogenetic field and into the morphogenetic field of the planet onto which it will birth. Once a soul essence has entered its planetary morphogenetic field, it will then pass into the fetal pattern that was created for its entry. The fetal integration of the soul consciousness occurs. As the individualized morphogenetic field of the soul essence passes through the planetary morphogenetic field, it picks up the frequency patterns characteristic to the planetary core, which allows the essence to ground its identity within the collective energy imprint of the planet. After the frequency fence was applied and some of the third-dimensional tones were removed from the planetary morphogenetic field, soul essences passing through the earth core for birthing could not ground the full imprint for the third DNA strand, and the missing third-dimensional tones would not allow the companion codes from the soul morphogenetic field to plug into Earth's morphogenetic field. The DNA is created in physical terms as its already existing morphogenetic imprint passes through the Earth's core morphogenetic field, where the energy imprint from the DNA then picks up the particle patterns from the Earth that will flesh out the DNA imprint in terms of dense matter particles. If certain frequencies, tones, are missing from the Earth's core, those frequencies carried in the DNA imprint cannot flesh out into matter particles, and the DNA will manifest without those tones in its operational strands. The frequency fence caused the third DNA strand to manifest without the 7th through the 12th base tones and the 7th through the 9th overtones, which resulted in a genetic mutation for the human lineage. Dreaming. The third DNA strand corresponds to the third solar plexus chakra and the third level of the bioenergetic field, the mental body. The DNA mutation caused a division or missing frequency link in the third DNA strand, which manifested as a gap or void within areas of the bioenergetic system that corresponded to that strand. The 7th through the 12th base tones sub-frequency bands and 7th through the 9th overtones sub-frequency bands of the third dimension were blocked out of the third chakra and the nadial capsule, which naturally separates the third dimensional mental body and fourth dimensional astral body levels of the bioenergetic field, developed a second barrier, creating an even larger gap between the conscious mental awareness and the astral level of awareness. In sleep, the consciousness could travel into the astral identity, but now there would be a gap between the waking identity and its astral experience. This gap, created by the missing 7 through 12 base tones and the 7 through 9 overtones, created a distortion in dream recall, in which the consciousness would encounter the missing tones and be unable to translate sensory information from the frequency bands corresponding to those tones into the genetic code. Prior to the frequency fence, memory of other dimensional experience during the dream state was far more lucid, as experiences the consciousness had while disassociated from its focus in the body during sleep would be stored in the form of electrical impulse within the consciousness. And when the consciousness returned to the body, these electrical impulses would be translated through the body into coherent sequential memory patterns. And in parentheses here it says, note, conscious recall of higher dimensional experiences requires the fourth DNA strand, as this strand allows the higher dimensional experience to be transferred into the lower DNA strands and then into cellular memory and conscious recognition. The third Lemanian root race and their Ur-Antrian cloister, and the fourth Atlantean and Atlantean root race, and the Brianoa cloister did not dream multidimensionally as the later races would, because they did not have the fourth DNA strand manifest within their genetic code. The dream experience was limited to activity taking place within the second and third dimensional fields. The fifth root race, Aryans, and their Hyberu cloister brought multi-dimensional dreaming and astral projection of consciousness into the human gene pool, as they held the fourth strand DNA imprint within their genetic code. In the races of the first seeding, before the seal of Amente was manifest in the gene code, Dreaming took place on a fully conscious level, and a sleep state disassociation from the body was not required, as perception of various dimensional fields took place on a fully conscious level. One would consciously perceive and interact with the dimensional fields corresponding to the number of DNA strands in the genetic code, and the physical body was continually replenished on a conscious level by drawing energy from the morphogenetic field of a mente through breathing. Only after the seal of a mente was applied did humans have to disassociate from the body in sleep to revitalize the physical structure and participate in other dimensional experience. After the frequency fence of 9,540 BC was in place, higher dimensional experience was unable to translate directly into the human cellular memory. The electrical impulses within the consciousness within which the imprint of the higher dimensional experiences were stored could not pass the gap within the third DNA strand, so this experimental memory could not be translated into consciousness, sequential dream recall. In contemporary times, now that the frequency fence is beginning to lift and the third DNA strand is being repaired, sequential dream recall and memory of higher dimensional experiences is once again developing in the races, and experiences associated with development of higher DNA strands such as lucid dreaming, simultaneous dreaming, conscious astral projection, and mental bilocation are also now emerging. For the earlier races, this loss of cognizant dream recall created an extreme sense of isolation and an overdeveloped focus of consciousness within the external world. Dream recall was not the only area of human consciousness to be affected by the frequency fence. The ego and the higher self. Through the mutation in the third DNA strand, which manifested as a division within the third chakra and mental body level of the bioenergetic field, a new kind of consciousness developed within the races. As the 1st through 6th base tones and 10th through 12th overtones were left operational within their third DNA strand, two aspects of personal mental identity were brought into manifestation. The conscious mind or conscious focus attention was divided into two areas that did not consciously associate with each other. The portions of consciousness that manifested through the first through sixth base tones of the third DNA strand were focused and could perceive within the lower vibrating energy fields of the 1st through 6th subfrequency bands of the third dimension. The portions of consciousness that manifested through the 10th through 12th overtones of the third DNA strand were focused and could perceive within the higher vibrating energy fields of the 10th through 12th subfrequency bands of the third dimension. The portions of personal identity manifesting through the lower base tones of the third DNA strands became the lower self, or what has come to be known as the ego. And its perceptions are limited to activity taking place within the lower portions of the third dimension. The portions of identity manifesting through the higher overtones of the third DNA strand became the higher self. The higher self mind could perceive activity taking place within the highest sub-frequency bands of the third dimension. The lower mind ego developed an exaggerated sense of dualistic perception as it became locked into 5 sensory perception. Using only 5 sensory perception, extreme distinctions between the inner world of personal identity and the outer world of manifest reality were perceived, as the cognition of where the inside and outside of things meet was blocked from conscious perception. The inner and outer realities meet within the morphogenetic field of the race identity and that of the Earth's core, where the energetic interrelationship between the planet and its people is understood. Through the race morphogenetic field in the sphere of Amente, the individual's connection to its race and the purposes for its existence within the greater plan of evolution can be understood, as the evolutionary plan exists within the morphogenetic field as an energetic blueprint through which identities and events manifest. The race morphogenetic field also holds the individuated morphogenetic field for a person and contains the higher dimensional soul aspects of consciousness through which the contours of the individual incarnation are designed. Through the frequency fence, the ego became cut off from conscious relationship with its personal morphogenetic field and from the morphogenetic field of its race and the planet. The ego awareness felt itself to be isolated and separate from the world around it, and could not perceive the creative principle or purposes through which it came to be. Human consciousness became locked within the illusion of matter as a result of the frequency fence, unable to perceive or comprehend the reality of non-manifest substance through which all manifest things are created. Human consciousness lost touch with the common source within and behind all things, and so lost its ability to identify with and comprehend the beings and things that appeared to exist outside of itself. Humanity's connection to the universe remained a reality, but the ego awareness lost the ability to consciously perceive that reality. The egotistical mind perceives itself as limited and finite, and so developed an overly aggressive need to dominate and control its external environment as a means of attempting to ensure its survival. As humans evolved to view themselves as finite creatures at the mercy of a seemingly hostile external environment, the lower egotistical mind became isolated, lonely, and very frightened. Healing of the egotistical mind would require its integration with the higher self-mind, through which its power and place within the universe could be understood. The higher self-mind could not only perceive in the highest frequency bands of the third dimension, it could also plug into the Dimension 4 astral identity and the soul matrix identity that is contained within the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimensional frequency patterns of the Amente morphogenetic field. The higher self allowed the 4th and 5th DNA strands to begin manifesting if those strand imprints were contained within the race DNA imprint. As long as the frequency fence was operational, the ego could not translate higher dimensional data into conscious awareness, nor could it translate the comprehension of the higher self-mind. But the elemental aspects of the human body, the portions of consciousness manifesting through the second DNA strand that are focused within the second dimensional frequency fields, could translate portions of the portions of the higher self-cognition as the 10th through 12th overtones of DNA strand 2 could translate some of the electrical impulses from the 10th through 12th overtones of DNA strand 3. Strand 2 had already been altered through the seal of Pallador, creating a division between the Dimension 2 emotional identity and the third dimension mental awareness, which created the subconscious mind. So the portions of the higher dimensional, higher self-perceptions that could translate through the Dimension 2 strand appeared within the body through the subconscious mind, appearing as felt emotional response. The higher self communicated data to the conscious awareness via subconsciously sensed feeling that became known as the intuitive sense. Intuition represents information from the higher self sent to the conscious awareness via the body and subconscious mind. In the present day human, as the third DNA strand begins its reverse mutation through the lifting of the frequency fence, the perceptions and cognition of the higher self become consciously available to the lower mind of the ego. And through this conscious connection, the ego rediscovers its multidimensional aspects of awareness. When the third DNA strand is completely assembled, the higher self aspect of identity will merge with the ego, and the mental awareness will comprehend itself as being a multidimensional identity. The higher self serves as a bridge between the identity focused in harmonic universe 1 reality and the soul imprint of that identity which is focused in harmonic universe 2. The first step in integrating the ego into its multi-dimensional identity is to open the lines of conscious communication between the ego and the higher self. In contemporary terms, this is often called channeling your higher self, but the reality of that process is assembling the third DNA strand through which the two levels of mind can merge. If the ego makes a conscious effort to allow its higher self to speak, the third DNA strand assembly process is accelerated. The information received from the higher self will evolve from vaguely sensed intuitive impressions to direct interverbal and visual communication. Then eventually the ego will understand the higher self to be part of its own identity, a focus of consciousness into which it can direct its awareness to receive a greater spectrum of information. Once a person becomes the higher self, there is no longer an egotistical focus, as the lower and higher minds have become integrated into a superconscious mind, which can develop multi-dimensional perception and abilities. Through the superconscious mind, the Dimension 2 subconscious mind and Dimension 1 physical body consciousness can also be integrated into the conscious awareness. Working with, through, and becoming the higher self is the next step in human evolution, and through this endeavor, the healing and assembly of the DNA can occur. Under the direction of the superconscious self, the higher self and the ego came into being within the human lineage in 9,540 BC, manifesting as a result of the frequency fence that was created to stop the sphere of Amente from destroying the earth by entering the earth's core prematurely. Okay, let's see what this next part says. Alcyone and the Templar seal. The Templar seal and the Anu Melchizedek and Hebrew races, realignment of the Melchizedek cloister morphogenetic field, the Anu Melchizedek and Hebrew races removed, and Ceres Egyptians and cloister Melchizedeks appointed as guardians of the Ark of the Covenant, resurrecting the Great Pyramid and Sphinx, 8,000 BC through 5,466 BC. The races who returned from the inner earth to reestablish surface civilization after the 9,558 BC sinking of the Atlantean islands were faced with many new hardships as rebuilding of their cultures was orchestrated through manual labor without the use of the great crystal generators and high-powered ankhs to which they had become accustomed. Following the employment of Earth's quarantine in 9540 BC and its resulting genetic mutation, evolution became an even slower, more arduous task. The Egyptian, Ceres, Anu, Melchizedeks, and Hebrew people were guardians of the Ark of the Covenant and were permitted to have custody of the rod and staff so their connection to the inner earth civilizations could remain open. The Great Pyramid and the Sphinx suffered damage during the flooding that followed the downfall of Atlantis, but portions of these and other structures remained intact, and these were once again used as a central hub around which the cultures would rebuild. The serious Egyptians remained as the royal line in Egyptian culture, while remnants of the Lemurian and Atlantean cultures and of the Brianoa and Ur-Antrian cloisters, the Anu Melchizedeks of the inner earth, the Hibiru, Aryans, cloister Melchizedeks, and the Hebrew races populated Egypt and various other locations of the globe. The first number of generations were preoccupied with survival issues and the development of small cultural clans, which eventually led to the development of larger social orders. The Egyptian culture received much assistance from the inner earth races as the Ark of the Covenant was located within the Egyptian lands and surface guardianship of this and other portal passages was placed in the hands of the developing races in this area. During the retreat to the inner earth at the time of the sinking of Atlantis, numbers of Templar Anu had also entered the inner territories. The Templar Anu were those born into the Atlantean subrace Egyptian race through the Melchizedek host matrix, who later interbred with the members of the Anunnaki resistance, inheriting all or part of the genetic distortion Templar seal from this extraterrestrial race. The Templar Anu interbred with many different races in generations following Atlantis, especially with those of the Anu Melchizedek and Hibiru Melchizedek lines, passing on concentrations of the Templar seal distortion through the Melchizedek races. The distortions of the Templar creed had also made their way into the inner earth societies, and their patriarchal, elitist, sexist, materialistic slant began to color the original teachings of the Templar within certain groups. These creed distortions became apparent in the evolution of the surface cultures, as did the progression of the Templar seal genetic distortion, as well as various other genetic anomalies that were created through interbreeding with a variety of interstellar visitors during the times of Atlantis. The genetic distortions were of great concern to the Palladorians and Guardian races, as if the deviations in the DNA imprint became too numerous, the original imprint of the races would be lost. If enough soul essences formed lineage with deviating genetic imprints passed back into their race morphogenetic field at death, those deviations would eventually override the original patterns in the morphogenetic field. If the Amente race morphogenetic field became misaligned with the 12-strand pattern, evolution of the 12-strand DNA package could not take place. In order to preserve the integrity of the Turanusium 2 human genetic line and Syrian Council, the Syrian Council and Elohim were authorized by the Rock Confederacy to remove certain portions of the race morphogenetic field from which the sphere of Amente, so the Amente race morphogenetic field would not become misaligned by deviations in the genetic imprint. The races removed from Mente would pass through the planetary morphogenetic field of Alcyone, and after death, the soul presence would evolve as consciousness for a time within the frequency fields of Alcyone, through which genetic deviations of the human line could be processed out before the consciousness returned to the sphere of Amente. This separation of the morphogenetic fields became known as the Templar seal. It involved removing the 6-base tone of the second DNA strand, the 6-overtone of the 4th DNA strand, and the 12th overtone of the 5th DNA strand. The races bearing this genetic imprint configuration were sealed out of the sphere of Amente morphogenetic field and redirected into evolution through the Alcyone, with the intention of one day releasing the Templar seal and re-entering their morphogenetic field back into the sphere of Amente for ascension. The races bearing the most genetic deviation were those of the Templar Anu, who had been seeded through the Melchizedek host matrix, and through them larger portions of the Melchizedek cloister had become misaligned with the 12-strand DNA imprint. Through the Melchizedek morphogenetic field, the Hebrew Melchizedeks and Anu Melchizedeks also carried excessive genetic deviations, so the morphogenetic fields of these groups were chosen for realignment through the Alcyone. There's a little footnote here. It says, the Zephilium, the original line of the modern-day Zeta Reticuli, and their Greys were one of the visiting groups to Atlantis who became genetically mixed with some of the Templar Anu race families. The reason contemporary Zeta sought genetic material from our race was that they hoped to find traces of their own original genetic imprint in our DNA, so they could reverse the mutations that had occurred in their own genetic lines and create hybrid versions of themselves that were more suited to Earth's environment. Again, in the book DMT, the Spirit Molecule, when Rick Strassman injects all those volunteers with DMT, most of them said that they had an experience where they were taken up on an alien spaceship, and there were gray aliens and different hybrids, and they were being used in the genetic experiments to create these hybrids. This is all very in alignment with the testimonials of the people that had multidimensional experiences with DMT during Dr. Rick Strassman's research in the 1990s. And also tons of other UFO abductee stories also say the same thing. Lots of DNA manipulation, genetic experiments, creating hybrids, using the DNA of certain humans to create different hybrids. Very interesting stuff, if you ask me. All right, let's keep reading. It is important to note that the genetic deviations carried by these groups were not inferior or quote-unquote bad. The deviations simply would have taken those aspects of humanity on a different evolutionary course. This would have eventually redirected the entire course of human evolution, and the original Turanusium 12-strand DNA package would no longer be available to the human lineage of Earth. The 12-strand package is one of the highest genetic imprints within Harmonic Universe 1 and Harmonic Universe 2, for it allows full transmutation out of matter and can embody the consciousness of a 12-dimensional oversoul when the 12 strands are fully activated. Very few biological forms possess this potential. Humans carrying the lineage of the deviated genetic codes are in no way inferior to other human strains, and as long as excessive deviations are not allowed to alter the original Amente morphogenetic field, those races do not pose a threat to the human lineage. As you will see through the course of this chapter, the guardian races have ensured the integrity of the human genetic imprint, and have also made it possible for the races deviating from that imprint to return and ascend to the sphere of Amente. The Hebrew morphogenetic field was realigned and entered into the sphere of Amente about 2,000 years ago with the birth of the man who has come to be known as Jesus Christ. And the Anu Melchizedeks and Templar Anu were re-entered into Amente about 3,300 years ago with the birth of the pharaoh Akhenaten, Amenophis IV. At your present point in history, all of your races are part of the Amente morphogenetic field, and all of you are in the process of healing and assembling various DNA configurations. We do not want the more immature among you to misuse this information on genetic lineage as grounds for unfair or discriminatory attitudes towards other members of your race, for such discrimination has no intelligent basis and is groundless. We would also like to mention here that of the 3rd through 7th root races and their cloisters, each of the 7 subraces within each race carries one of the race strains from each of the 7 root races. For example, those of the Aryan root affiliated with the Hybaru cloister who carry the gene code imprint for the white-skinned races have within their 7 subraces a white-skinned subrace with the dominant Aryan or Hybaru cloister gene, a black-skinned subrace with the dominant Eunjeki or Uniseti cloister gene, a yellow-skinned subrace with the dominant Mavorian or Melchizedek cloister gene, a brown-skinned subrace with a dominant Lemurian or Urantian gene, and a red-skinned subrace with the dominant Atlantean or Brianua cloister gene. There will also be 2 additional subraces which bear the primary skin color of their root race and cloister who carry a dominant gene from the first Polarian and second Hyperborean root races of Gaia. Each of the primary root races and their cloisters have this intermixed subracial division. The 7 subfamilies within each of the 7 subraces are even further intermixed. We tell you this so you may come to realize that all of your races, though diversified in genetic content, are equal in value, and all of them, by design of their morphogenetic pattern, are intertwined. Discrimination of race, gender, lineage, or skin color is a ridiculous and unfounded notion as gender discrimination. Both of these ideas were given to you at various periods by different groups of non-terrestrial visitors in order to manipulate the evolution of the races for their own purposes. These notions have kept your races and genders at odds, competing for who is better or best, when instead the true power and beauty of the human race lies within its unity, which allows for diversification. You are all of equal value and importance, and each of you brings unique characteristics and gifts into the human gene pool. It will do your species well to realize this fact so you can learn to work together, through which all of you may heal and prosper. Now we will conclude our discussion on the realignment of the Melchizedek morphogenetic field. I think what it's talking about up here, about this division that was manufactured by non-terrestrial visitors, I think that this might be a reference, not only to the Tower of Babel story, but there's probably been multiple different events where these non-terrestrials tried to separate and divide people, with all these different things, the Tower of Babel and dividing the languages and all that stuff. That was just probably one incident, and there's been a continuation of incidents to further divide people, and you still see it in progress today with all this transgender nonsense, and the political right versus left is all a divide and conquer strategy, and all the different religions contribute to the divide and conquer strategy, race, income level, etc., etc. It's all still being perpetuated on a massive and highly sophisticated scale. Following the implementation of the Templar seal upon the Anu and Hebrew morphogenetic fields, these groups were provided with the teachings from the priesthood of Ur in the inner earth, through which they were counseled not to interbreed with members of the other races, so as not to pass on the Templar seal gene configuration. Unfortunately, these teachings eventually became distorted. The original meaning of the ban on interracial mixing became lost, and the teachings evolved into an elitist creed of genetic superiority among these groups. This attitude was perpetuated within the Anu and Hebrew races and later developed into unnecessary cultural discord between those of the Anu and Hebrew lineage. And the Syrian Egyptian ruling class and the Hebrew, Aryan, and cloister Melchizedek families, who made up the majority of the Egyptian nations, of the Egyptian nations' populations. This interracial discord exaggerated already existing conditions of competition and conquest among races when the halls of Amente were opened in 1374 BC. This interracial discord proved to be a second primary setback to preparation for the 2017 AD mass ascension wave. So it talks about this 2017 mass ascension wave. I mean, but what does anyone believe that actually happened? That something significant happened in 2017? I mean, the only thing I could really think of is that was an election year, because they do the election 2016 going into 2017. That's an election year where power is transferred. I mean, what do you guys think? Did anything else happen in 2017? Did you feel something different in 2017? Because remember, they wrote this was written in 2003. And 2017 already passed. We're in 2024. Do you think things are changing? All right, let's continue winning. Due to interracial difficulties between the Anu Melchizedek and the Syrian Egyptian majorities, the halls of Amente were once again closed and mass preparation for ascension was curtailed. Okay, so according to this, it's saying that this was supposed to be some kind of mass ascension, but it didn't happen. According to this, I mean, I'm not sure. That seems like what it says here. Due to interracial difficulties between the Anu Melchizedek and Syrian Egyptians, the halls of Amente were once again closed, and mass preparation for the ascension wave was curtailed. When the Templar seals were applied in 8000 BC, guardianship of the Ark of the Covenant was transferred out of the hands of the Anu Melchizedeks and the Hebrew races into the protection of the Syrian Egyptians and cloister family Melchizedeks. Those born through the sphere of Amente, Melchizedek cloister, after the Anu and Hebrew morphogenetic fields had been removed. Previously, the four races shared responsibility and accessibility to the Ark of the Covenant, but following the Templar seal, only cloister Melchizedek and Syrian Egyptians were permitted direct involvement with the inner earth priesthood of Ur, whose training kept knowledge of the Ark of the Covenant alive within the surface cultures. From 8000 BC forward, the cultures developed with greater racial divisions, some groups leaving the areas which came to be known as Giza, integrating into other cultures bases which were along the Nile River, such as the Thebes and the Nubia. Such as Thebes and into Nubia. Others journeying into the territories of what came to be known as Jerusalem and Sumeria and Ur along the Euphrates River, intermixing with the descendants of the other root races and their cloisters. The Syrian Egyptians and cloister Melchizedeks remained concentrated in the area of Giza where the Ark of the Covenant entered the earth, and continued to build up their civilization with periods of achievement tempered by periods of digression. During the height of the pre-dynastic Egypt, following an influx of cultures from various other regions, the Seres Egyptians and cloister Melchizedeks, under the direction of the priesthood of Ur, made an attempt to reconstruct the remains of the Great Pyramid of Giza at the Sphinx, and the Sphinx, which had been damaged in the deluge following the sinking of Atlantis in 9958 BC. Using manual labor, the Great Pyramid was restored around 5546 BC as a religious center through which the Ark of the Covenant was fortified and secured, but the structure no longer served as an interstellar teleport due to the pole tilt resulting from the Atlantean cataclysm and the frequency fence of 9540 BC. There's been a lot of movies out there, like the movie Stargate with Kurt Russell, which is all about the pyramids and extraterrestrials and taking over an avatar body with the consciousness and the whole movie Stargate. It's describing this technology. It's the whole movie Stargate is based off what this book is about. And I mean, they even have a whole TV series about it. But it's just very interesting. Every time I read something that's about ancient history, the creation myths, the floods, the pyramids, the extraterrestrials, the Anunnaki, whatever you want to call it, or ancient religion, it always comes back to this advanced technology. And then you look at the Hollywood science fiction movies, like almost every single space movie, science fiction movie is based off of this knowledge. Because the Hollywood producers that have all that money, like most of them are Freemasons or initiates into this knowledge. And a lot of the stuff that was even produced back in the 1980s, 1990s, before everyone had access to this stuff, and before everyone was on the internet and able to access all this, the Hollywood producers knew all this stuff, because a lot of the movies they made back then also, it all comes from this Anunnaki history stuff. All right, let's continue. The Sphinx was reconstructed around 5466 BC as the contours of the structure's facial features were altered to more closely resemble the appearance of a Seres Egyptian line, and the stronger, more exaggerated facial features characteristic to the Anunnaki lineage, who originally designed the structure in 459 BC. Even in this book, it's saying that the Anunnaki lineage designed the pyramid structures, which is also congruent with what it talks about in stuff like the teachings of Thoth the Atlantean, which also in those teachings he claims that that was his architecture and he was an Anunnaki. Okay, so the features and the characteristics to the Anunnaki lineage who originally designed the structure were omitted from the reconstruction. The form of the leonine body remained as a tribute to remembered gods of Egyptian mythology, who represented symbolic trace memories of ancient Anunnaki affiliations with the harmonic universe, two leonine races. The early dynastic periods of Egypt emerge around 3500 BC, bearing increasing influence and cultural influx from various and other regions. The Ark of the Covenant, Sphere of Amenti, and the tools of the rod and the staff became closely guarded secrets held within the confines of select Seres Egyptian Melchizedek cloister families with whom the priests of Ur continued to covert contact. Okay, and then that looks like that was the end of chapter 4. So we'll continue chapter 5, which is entitled Return to Amenti, in another upload.